Okay, I'm glad we're having this opportunity to go over these important points about the Seder, because coming to the Seder prepared is critical. An important thing before we get started, I'm going to reiterate this along the way: enjoy the Seder. Make sure to enjoy the Seder. It's very easy for the Seder to be something stressful. There's a lot of preparation that goes into it. There's a lot of details, a lot of halachas, a lot of things we're trying to do all at the same time, and it's easy to get things mixed up. Make sure to enjoy the Seder, and the more prepared you are, the easier it will be to enjoy. So that is point number one: to prepare the physical aspects of it, the food items, but also to prepare the content, to have a game plan about how you're going to go about your Seder. Those are really key. Okay, there's two themes. I want to, as part of the introduction, I want to cover the mitzvos of the Seder night, just list them off to give you like a broad scope as to what's happening, and then two continuous themes that govern many different aspects of the Seder. So in terms of mitzvos, there are many, many, many mitzvos that we do on the Seder night. Some of them are da'oraisa, some of them are biblical, some of them are banan, rabbinic. Some of them are minhagim, customs, tag-alongs, if you will, as we'll explain. Okay, so the mitzvahs of the Torah that we have at the Seder night are really two. There's matzah. Eating matzah is a biblical commandment that we fulfill at the Seder night. And magid, the telling the story of the Exodus, which is otherwise known as Sipur Yetzius Mitzrayim, telling the story of the Exodus of Egypt. Those are two mitzvahs from the Torah that are done on the Seder night. The mitzvahs d'Rabbanan, the rabbinic mitzvahs, are the afikoman, which is in place of the Pesach, the carbon Pesach. That extra piece of matzah is not just fun for the kids. The real concept of the afikoman is eating matzah in place of the carbon Pesach, the Pesach sacrifice, which we would eat a kazayas of meat from the paschal lamb, and that piece of matzah of afikoman takes the place of that. That's a mitzvah midrabanan. The maror that we eat is also a mitzvah midrabanan. That really should be a mitzvah from the Torah, but it's only considered a biblical mitzvah when it's together with the carbon Pesach. Since we don't have the real carbon Pesach, our maror is only midrabanan. And then there are two more rabbanan add-ons. There's the 4 cups of wine. That is a mitzvah from the Rabbanan. And then there's reclining during the Seder. And we'll get into more detail about that. Reclining during the Seder, that is also a mitzvah de Rabbanan. Those are the special Seder mitzvos. There are also special Seder minhagim. There's the charosas, everyone's favorite charosas, the ground up nuts and apples with wine and cinnamon that we dip the maror, that we dip the bitter herb into that. That is really just a minhag. It's a tag along with the maror, and we'll get into the details of why we do that later. Karpas as well. Karpas, the vegetable that we dip in the salt water in the beginning of the Seder, that is really not a mitzvah in of itself. That's a takane, a rabbinic add-on to trigger the questioning of the night. So in addition to all these Seder-specific mitzvos, there are 2 extra mitzvos, which are not unique to the Seder, but it is Yom Tov, it is Pesach night. So we have also the mitzvah of Kiddush, which is fulfilled with the first of the 4 cups. And we also have the mitzvah of Seudah, of having a festive meal. And on Yom Tov, we have a mitzvah of having a festive meal. That is a mitzvah from the Torah, of the Samachta b'chagecha, to rejoice in the holidays. So that applies as well. And that's the meal that we have as part of the Seder. Okay, so those are all the mitzvahs and all of the, in a kind of a snapshot. Now let's talk about some of the governing themes of the Seder. Two themes that really influence a lot of different components of the Seder, as we'll see as we progress, is number one, derech cherus, which means acting as free men. We conduct ourselves during the Seder in a way that is an expression of our freedom, because the celebration of the Seder, the celebration of Pesach, is our freedom from the slavery of Egypt, and therefore we adjust everything that we're doing along the way to convey that message. Secondly, the second theme, which comes up many places in the Seder, which explains a lot of unusual things that we do, things that don't really make so much sense, though many of those things are intentional, and they are done for exactly that purpose in order to get the children to ask. We want questions. Chazal, our sages, teach that the best way to learn, the best way to absorb information is if you are triggered to ask a question. If you ask a question, something's bothering you, and you go ahead and you ask that question, then you're getting the answer. You're learning something on a much deeper level that way. That is the other governing theme, background information for the Seder. So now let's get into some of the specifics of the Seder. So firstly is reclining. Many parts of the Seder are supposed to be done while reclining. That is the drinking of all 4 cups of wine, the eating of the matzah, as well as the afikoman, and ideally the entire meal should be done while reclining. Now, what does reclining mean? Reclining is not done sitting back this way as we typically would. Reclining is to the side, and specifically to the left, not to the right. And this has nothing to do with whether you're a righty or a lefty. Regardless of that, you always recline to the left. And that has to do with the fact that the windpipe, it helps prevent someone from choking, chas v'sholom, if they're eating while they're reclining. Now, there is an opinion, the Rabbi is of the opinion that today, that it's not common practice for even the most noble, the most luxurious people to eat while reclining. There's no need to recline nowadays. And that is, that's the opinion of the Rabbi. Now, we do not paskin that way. We don't follow that opinion. We don't rely on that ideally. We do recline. However, we'll see that because we have that sort of backup to rely on, it helps us in a couple of scenarios. So number one is women. There's a dispute about whether women should recline, whether that's considered proper or not proper. And there are different opinions. The opinion of the Shulchan Aruch is that a woman who is nashim chashuvos, a woman who is of a certain degree of nobility and prominence, she should recline. The Ramah comments that all of our women are chashuvos. All of our women are of prominence and of importance, but he adds, but nonetheless, the minhag is not to recline, and he cites the Rav Yah that anyways, there's an opinion that no one has to recline, so women can rely on that. Because of these different opinions, there are different traditions. So some families, the women do recline, some families, the women don't recline. Either way, you're safe, and you should follow whatever your family's custom is. If your family doesn't have a specific custom, then the women can do whichever way they feel more comfortable with. They certainly shouldn't be concerned if they accidentally forgot to recline. Now, speaking of accidentally forgetting to recline, technically speaking, if someone forgets to recline during the cups of wine or the matzah, they need to do it over again. It is to that extent that the Rabbanan wanted us to recline while we drink our wine and while we eat our matzah, that they require us to do it again if we forget.
So we should all make sure we have good wine then.
That's right. Then you'll be reclining regardless, right?
We'll be forgetting. Oh darn! I'll have another cup.
That's right. If you've got good wine, then you don't have to worry too much about having to drink a little more. So that's in terms of reclining. Now, the Ramah adds that because of this opinion of the Rav Yah that we mentioned before, because there's an opinion that no one has to recline nowadays, because nowadays that's not common practice. For that reason, he writes that really b'diavad you don't have to. You don't have to do it over again. And then that leaves us with this kind of gray area, and therefore the conclusion of the Ramah is when there's no harm done, do it again. When it is problematic, do not do it again. Now, what does that mean? That means for the first 2 cups of wine, where drinking a little more is not a big deal, so then you would do it again if you forgot to recline. Again, this is only true for men that are obligated to recline according to all opinions. And the same is true with matzah. The 3rd or 4th cup of wine, it's problematic to be drinking another cup at that point. We'll get to that soon. And therefore, the Ramah says if someone forgets to recline then, they should not drink another cup of wine to replace that. Those are the halachas regarding reclining. And now, let's discuss the 4 cups of wine. The rule as far as what type of wine to use is very, very similar to Kiddush. So whatever you're using for Kiddush, you really could use for the 4 cups of wine, and that includes grape juice. There are 2 areas that make the 4 cups of wine a little bit different, and that is there is more of a reason to try to have something alcoholic. Alcoholic wine is always preferred for Kiddush because that's more clearly wine. Grape juice is questionable, but for the 4 cups of wine at the Seder, it's additionally advantageous to have an alcoholic wine because of this idea we mentioned before of derech cherus. That's another expression of our freedom that we're enjoying an alcoholic beverage. That's something that free men do, not something that a slave would do. There's also a common minhag to try to get red wine specifically. That is not absolutely required. And there are many poskim who actually say white wine is preferred if it's of higher quality than the available red wine. But nonetheless, many people have the custom to specifically get red wine because of the idea that it represents blood, and there are certain parts of the Seder where the wine is used to represent blood, either the blood of the Egyptians when we're dipping at the plagues, or the blood of the Jews that when we mix it into the charoses, and therefore many people prefer red wine. Now, what's really most important of all, in terms of what wine you choose for the Seder, is that it should be something that you enjoy. It's the point of drinking 4 cups of wine is to be an expression of our freedom. So if the wine you're drinking is this thick, syrupy manischewitz, and you're just choking it down after the second cup, forcing it down, that's not the chatchila. That's not the ideal thing to do. And really, the most important criteria is that it should be something that you enjoy. So if you like dry, then get it something dry. If you like the Rashi, then get the Rashi. Whatever the case may be, whatever your personal taste is, that's what you want to go for. In terms of alcohol content, it's important to be careful regarding alcohol content of wine. 4 cups of wine is a lot for a lot of people. And especially if the meal is not until significantly into the Seder night, drinking a glass of wine on an empty stomach can really get to some people's heads. And then it can make it a challenge to really delve into the story and all of the meaningful content of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, telling the story of the Exodus, and that would be a terrible loss. On the other hand, I have heard Rabbanim who say that if a little bit of alcohol helps a person loosen up, helps a person get into the spirit, and helps a person, transmit to the other people of the Seder the joy of our freedom, that could be recommended. That could be recommended. And again, it should be something it should be a wine that you enjoy. So those are the things to bear in mind when choosing your wine.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely, please.
So if we usually drink grape juice most of the year, so we're not really tolerant of too much alcohol, what's the minimum? Was it 5%? I forget. Now that I'm buying it for myself, what's the minimum level of like the lowest alcohol content that can be considered wine for the Pesach Seder?
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. It's hard to give an exact number to that. I think Rav Heinemann has given an exact number to that. You could probably find that on the Star K book. I believe they put it there. I did not look that up in advance. But what I've heard from other Rabbanim is that enough alcohol that you can taste the fact that it's alcoholic is sufficient.
Okay, great.
Normally, especially for someone like you, for someone who's not, who's used to grape juice, I would think 5% would be sufficient.
And also, what's the minimum shear? How many ounces is that? I probably could look that up also.
That's the next thing to discuss, which is also critical because for a lot of people, drinking a lot of anything that's high in sugar is difficult, especially for diabetics, etc. It's really a problem. And really, if someone has a real health concern, the rules will be different than what I'm about to tell you now, and we should discuss that privately. But for everyone, the amount is as follows. First thing we need to know is a revius. The amount for what's considered a drink in many areas of halacha is a revius, which is a fourth of a lug, which is a certain Talmudic measurement. What that translates into in ounces is a matter of dispute, and the accepted halacha is slightly more than 3 ounces, 3.3 something to that amount, 3.3 ounces. Now, how much do you need? So let's say my cup is a little bit bigger than that. How much do I need to drink? So the ideal is to drink the entire cup. That's the best. If that's difficult, drinking most of the cup is also acceptable, and that wouldn't even be considered a b'diavad. That would also be within the realm of lechatchila. If someone has a really big cup that's holding a multiple reviuses, let's say an 8-ounce cup, for example, which is not so big if you think about it. So then drinking 1 revius of that glass is sufficient. And b'diavad, if the only glass you have is 8 ounces, and to drink an entire 3.3 ounces of wine is really a challenge for you, rove of a revius, rove of that, let's say 2 ounces, would be enough, which is very little. A smart thing to do is to have small cups. If you have small cups, let's say a 4-ounce cup or even a 5-ounce cup, drinking 5 ounces for a lot of people is not very much at all and is no trouble at all. And then you've got you're beyond the most machmir shita of a revius, weight with 5 ounces and something like that, even 4 ounces, whatever you find, that is really a smart way to go because it limits the amount that you need to drink to get the most ideal halachic position. Now, that being said, someone who has no trouble drinking wine and they enjoy it and they enjoy a glass of wine, go ahead. There's nothing wrong with an 8-ounce glass. But being prepared with the right size glass is really a smart move and really can go a long way. Okay, the next things to be aware of with the 4 cups is that we drink it derech cherus. We drink it in a way of free men. So there's 2 parts to that. Number 1 is that we pour for each other. We're not supposed to pour for ourselves. And the second thing is that you recline while drinking the 4 cups, as we mentioned previously. The other thing to bear in mind is, let's say I want to drink something more than just the 4 cups. Am I allowed to? It doesn't make a difference if it's wine. It doesn't make a difference if it's a different beverage. So the halacha is that you don't want to add extra cups in a way that will appear that you are doing 5 instead of 4. So what that means is for the first 2 cups, where you would be able to continue drinking more based on that original Bori Pri Hagafen that you made on the first cup, that would cover additional drinks. You are allowed to drink more. Cups number 3 and number 4, because of the fact that there's an afterbroth and there's separations and things like that, you're not supposed to be adding extra drinks between cups 3 and 4. Now, getting back to cups number 1 and 2, cup number 2 is not really so relevant because that's leading right into the meal, and certainly during the meal you can drink freely. But between cups number 1 and number 2, someone is not supposed to drink additional alcohol during that period, unless it's like someone's really thirsty, they just want to take another sip, that'd be okay. But to drink significant additional alcohol is not the post can say not to do that. And the reason, as we mentioned before, someone has to be careful not to get too tipsy, drunk, whatever the case may be, when they're trying to get into the Maggid and tell the story. Non-alcoholic beverages are a different story. And for a lot of people, a cup of coffee is a good idea. A cup of coffee at that point to wake yourself up a little bit. It's pretty late already at that point, and you've got a long way to go. That might be a great idea. Some people are just getting parched and they need to have a drink of water. That is perfectly fine. But the catch is that when you make the Bori Pri Hagafen on that first cup, which is really kiddush, you need to have in mind you're going to drink other things as well. So that's a really important thing. Once you have that in mind, you're covered. If you forgot to have that in mind, anything that's on the table in front of you is by default considered on your mind and included, and you don't have to worry about that. Okay, that's it for the 4 cups of wine. Let's move on now to Moror and Karpas.
Hey, Rabbi.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Quick question regarding the coast for Eliyahu Hanavi. Is there any requirements for that?
That's an interesting question. It seems to be considered like a real drink. I assume you need a revius at least, but I don't think there's any other requirements other than a revius, which is, again, a small amount, 3.3 ounces. So there are people that want to do like a hidur mitzvah, if you will. They want to beautify it and do it in like a grandiose way. And, you'll see these gigantic kosher aliyahus that are very ornate. It's a beautiful thing, not required, but that's something to be aware of. Speaking of beautiful things that are not required, something I meant to mention at the beginning of this year that I think is important to discuss is the Seder plate. There are different opinions about how to arrange the Seder plate. The Seder plate, people are used to like seeing these pictures with these fancy things, and they're engraved or they have names written on it. There's no requirement to have any special plate. A plain old plate could be your Seder plate. What's important is what you put on it. There are different opinions about how exactly to arrange it. The most common minhag is the Arizal. We're not going to go into depth about all the different opinions about this. It's beyond the scope of this year, but just to show you a picture of it. There you go. That's pretty good. This is the Arizal's Seder plate. That's the most common Seder plate that you'll find. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing it that way. Again, the important thing is having on the plate what's supposed to be there. And almost every Haggadah will have somewhere in there some type of diagram to help you out. Okay, so let's move on to the mower and to the karpas. So before the mower, towards the very beginning of the Seder, right after Kiddush, is when we come on to the karpas. Karpas is a vegetable. It's a non-bitter herb vegetable. This is not the mitzvah of mower right now, something different. And there are three primary minhagim regarding what's used for karpas. The most common customs are either celery, parsley, or a potato. Whatever your minhag is, you should continue doing that. And we dip it into some type of dip. Everyone knows salt water, and if they would see someone dip it in anything other than salt water, they would probably be shocked. But the reality is that in halacha, there's no requirement to dip it in anything in particular, as long as it is not charoses. You do not want to dip it in the charoses. That's for the maror. That's not for the karpas. Any type of dip is really sufficient. In halacha, vinegar is mentioned together with salt water, like as the two options. But the salt water, it represents the tears of the Jewish people. That has become the common practice. So that's certainly an appropriate thing to do, but not absolutely required. When eating the karpas, because it's being dipped into a liquid, therefore we wash our hands just like we would for bread before eating the vegetable, but we do not recite a bracha when we wash our hands. Then we go back to the table, we make the bracha boi pri ha'adama on the karpas, we dip it and then we eat it. When we make that bracha of boi pri ha'adama, we're supposed to have in mind that this will cover the maror, the bitter herbs. When later in the Seder, we try to avoid that bracha of boi pri ha'adama so as not to interrupt what's happening at that stage of the Seder. And therefore, we have that in mind when we eat the karpas. You want to make sure to eat a small amount of karpas, ideally, less than a kazayas. So really, the smaller the better, something really small. And that way you're not obligated to make an after bracha, which is something that we want to, that's ideal to avoid. The main reason for the karpas is not for the karpas itself. The main reason for the karpas is that it's a prelude to the manishtana. In the manishtana, in the four questions that are asked, which kind of opens up the discussion of the Seder night, that the karpas is part of it. It's one of the questions. One of the questions is, why are we dipping twice tonight and all the nights we only dip once? Part of that question is that we're dipping a vegetable before we even started our meal. Very strange, very out of place. That's intentional. We're trying to do something strange to get the kids to ask that question. That is the purpose of the karpas. Plus, it's helping us out with the maror, with the bracha of boi pri ha'adama. Okay, we're going to jump ahead to the maror for tonight, and then we're going to end tonight's shir with the maror. The maror is a bitter herb. There's a large number of different types of vegetables that could theoretically be used. Your best options, which are the most well accepted options, are horseradish root or romaine lettuce. Those are your two options. If you're going to go with a horseradish root, most people grind it. It makes it a little less intense. You don't want to leave it open for too long, because then it's going to lose its sharpness altogether, and then it won't be good for maror. So you want to keep it covered until you're ready to start your Seder. Once you're starting the Seder, it could be uncovered. That's fine. A little bit of leaving it uncovered is not a big deal. But that's as far as horseradish root is concerned. Romaine lettuce. How much? How much do you need? Horseradish root, 1 fluid ounce is enough, which is very small. Be careful with horseradish root. If you don't have experience and you take a chunk of it, you could really hurt yourself. So be careful not to do that. In terms of the shear for romaine lettuce, one of the really large leaves is a shear. That's the good enough for your shear for maror. There are these like fancy, they have these printouts that a lot of people have. You can find them online with different size boxes. Here's the box for matzah. Here's the box for maror. Those diagrams are a little bit on the machmir side. One large leaf of romaine lettuce. I've heard very chashuv rabbanim say that that is sufficient for the shear for maror. Something that's important to bear in mind, if you're using romaine lettuce, number one, just like whenever we use romaine lettuce, you want to make sure it's properly cleaned from insects. Secondly, speaking of cleaning and storage, you also want to be careful when it comes to romaine lettuce, not to let it soak. Now, why does that matter? Why am I bringing this up? The Gemara says that if maror is cooked, or if it's soaked for 24 hours in water, which according to halacha, it has the equivalent status of cooking, that will take away the sharpness of the maror, and it makes it halachically invalid. It is no longer acceptable to be used as maror. So that's a really important thing to bear in mind, which is why, by the way, we do not use jarred horseradish. Horseradish in the jar is not for the Seder. That's like the classic thing that old-fashioned people use. For maror, that is not halachically acceptable to be used for maror because it's soaking, and you can't use something that soaks for 24 hours. So when it comes to storing your romaine, lots of times you wash your romaine and then you stick it in the fridge, and sometimes that water pools to the bottom. If you get too much water there that it's sitting in a puddle of water for 24 hours, you could run into a problem of having soaked maror. That's something that you want to avoid. You don't have to go crazy. It's fine if it's wet. It could be wet. It has to be sitting in a puddle of water for 24 hours. That's what we want to avoid. A simple eitzah, something I've seen people do, which is an easy way to go, is you just shove a couple of pieces of paper towel in the bottom of the bag that you put your washed romaine into, and that will absorb the little bit of runoff water. Okay, let's talk about charoses, which goes together with the maror. The maror is not done while reclining because the maror is not an expression of our freedom at all. On the opposite, it is an expression of the bitterness of the slavery that we endured in Egypt. The charoses. So the charoses is a dip that we dip the maror in. Its primary function is to lessen the sharpness of the maror. Chazal, our sages in the Gemara, they say that maror is harmful. It could be dangerous to a person, and therefore we want to do a little something to lessen the blow, and therefore we dip it in the maror, the charoses. The idea is not to scoop up the charoses and enjoy a spoonful of charoses. That's not the point. The point is to dip your maror and then shake it off to just have something that lightens the sharpness of the maror of the bitter herb. There are different minhagim regarding the charoses recipe. In halacha, what's mentioned is to use fruits that represent the Jewish people, which is very a beautiful idea. The Ramah has the following list of ingredients. He writes apples, figs, nuts, presumably that means hazelnuts, pomegranates, almonds. Those are the things he lists. Those are all fruits or nuts that in different places in Tanakh and different sources are used as a metaphor for the Jewish people. You want to add spices to it, such as cinnamon or ginger even. Those are the basic ingredients for your charoses. You want the charoses to have a thick consistency to represent the mortar. And then at the Seder, you add a little bit of wine to your charoses to loosen it up. And that is to represent the blood of the Jewish people that fell into the mortar as they were working. Those are the ingredients for the charoses. And after you're done with your maror and then you're in the middle of your Seder meal, that's a good time to enjoy your spoonful of charoses. which is certainly one of the things I look forward to at the Seder. Okay, so I'm going to stop here for tonight's class, and I'm going to stop the recording. Next week,